Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm going to be trying a little new experiment. So, I suppose this could be a new format for the channel, although it's really not new either. Really, it's an extension or evolution of what I've always done with the In Brief segments. For the past near decade I've been doing this channel, I frequently included these segments designed for me to go back and catch up on the full studio album back catalogs of artists I'm reviewing, and giving my quick thoughts on them before jumping into a review of said artist's newest album. It's been a thing on this channel going as far back as my third ever review of The Chemical Brothers' Born in the Echoes. But there is a part of me who's started to feel like maybe that format could be somewhat limiting, and it's always obviously been pretty algorithm unfriendly at its core, considering it always has to be tied to a review of a brand new album. And there's been more and more of these kinds of videos as the years have gone by where the new album in question is clearly not designed to be the main focus, and these reviews are really not well designed to get people's attention unless it's the attention of the people who already regularly follow my channel and would know what they're getting into. I didn't even start including catalog in brief in the video titles until a few years ago. Somehow, over all these years, I never tried to make a video where the catalog in brief was the sole point of the video, despite me having been around long enough to see the rise of both deep cuts, artists' guides, and Mike Thisner's deep discog dives, and that format just staring me directly in the face this entire time. I just thought the way I handled in brief segments before could work well enough in the same way, and heck, this video was originally going to be another one of those, and present itself as a review of Rod Modell's Music for Bus Stations. But I felt like if I uploaded the video presented like that, it would be all but guaranteed to tank and barely anyone would watch it. Not only is it a minimal ambient record that I don't exactly have complicated thoughts on, but it's one that came out last year. This past October to be specific. And what people were there to see it have presumably already moved on. I even found out after writing most of this video that Modell already technically came out with another album after it. In any case, I figured I would be able to get people more interested if I just presented this video up front as a loose guide to this artist's vast catalog, which is kind of what it would have been designed to be either way. So here we are. Let's finally talk about Rod Modell. He's an ambient and dub techno producer from Detroit, who's been regularly at it since the late 90s. Probably best known for his work under the names Deepchord and Echospace, the latter name being a collaboration with Stephen Hitchell. His work is pretty legendary for those in the know, and I've gotten plenty of requests over the years to talk about him. I've seen people really highlight his albums with Echospace called The Coldest Season and Lumen most frequently, but his catalog is pretty huge. He's got a sizable discography both under the Deepchord name and under his real name, and he's also done plenty of side projects and collaborations under lots of different other names. Figuring out where to even start getting into this guy's catalog, let alone sampling through all or most of it, is going to be one heck of a difficult undertaking, considering not just the size of it, but how disjointed across different names and projects it is. And that's not even mentioning a decent chunk of these albums aren't even on streaming services. Especially a lot of the stuff under his real name has gotten really rare due to primarily being sold through limited vinyl runs. I had to really dig around through both official and unofficial uploads on YouTube and other deeper corners of the internet just to be able to hear a bunch of the stuff I'll be talking about in this video. But I dove in and pulled up as much Rod Modell as I could reasonably find, and I'm going to tell you about what I came across. I'll be starting with his work as Deepchord and in Echospace, and then I'll go through his albums under his real name, both solo and collaborations, and one compilation as a bonus. I will only be talking full albums, no EPs, and this is obviously not completely comprehensive to every project that he's ever been attached to. I skipped over the side projects or collaborations he's worked on under other names that aren't Deepchord or his real name. I have sampled around and even listened to some of the side stuff, though opted not to get into it here for the sake of simplifying things, and the fact that a lot of what I heard either isn't that interesting to talk about or sounds like other things he's done under his real name. Maybe check out Altering the Air by Global System Silently Moving if you want to hear something that sounds really similar to Gas, recorded right around the time that guy first started, albeit more synth-focused. I also liked Ancient Lights by Shore Lights. That's a collab he did with Chris McNamara and Walter Wasatch. There's two other nice ambient albums the three of them did under that name, but Ancient Lights had some cool, well-textured down-tempo grooves which stuck out to me a bit more. But, Yeah, I'm mostly gonna gloss over that kind of stuff. I also haven't heard any of his work with Stephen Hitchell under the name CV313, since that became Hitchell's solo project at some unspecified point, and I'm not sure which ones do or don't have Modell on board aside from maybe the project's first live album. Perhaps that'll be a marathon for another day. In any case, if there's any projects I missed in this video which you think I really need to go back and hear, please feel free to yell at me about it in the comments. And of course, reminder as per usual that these are all just opinions based on 1 or 2 listens of each album. As with the vast majority of in-brief segments I've done, writing this was just as much of a discovery process for me as it will be to someone clicking on this video with little or no prior familiarity with Modell. But without any further ado, let's finally get into it. Here's my thoughts on a big chunk of the Rod Modell discography so far. So let's start with Modell's work as Deepchord, and specifically his work with Stephen Hitchell as Deepchord Presents Echo Space, since the 2 main albums released under that name are probably the 2 single most well-known works that Modell has been involved in, and the ones I most frequently get requests to check out. Now, this album is from 2007, so this is far from being the start of Modell's story. Deepchord was first conceived a full decade before The Coldest Season, as a collaboration between Modell and Mike Schaummer, before the latter broke off and left the project to Modell on his own. By this point, Modell had released several EPs under the name, and several albums under his real name, which I'll get into later in this video. I should probably also mention that there was technically a Deepchord project released before The Coldest Season called 0106, which was a split between Modell and Schaummer both working solo. I didn't initially think to include it in this roundup, as I thought it was just like a demo tape or compilation or something and didn't think it counted as an album, but some qualify that as an album depending on who you ask, and if you want to hear the Deepchord sound in a more primitive and stripped back form, more focused on the simple techno grooves rather than the more atmospheric approach that pretty much everything else Modell's worked on sticks to, feel free to check that out. Mike Schaummer has it on his Bandcamp page. But this is technically the debut full-length album under both the Deepchord and Echo Space names, and as far as I can tell is also the moment at which Modell's work first started to break out to a marginally wider audience. Often credited as being one of the best regular old dub techno records of all time, and brought up in the same breath as stuff like Basic Channel. And yeah, while this is ridiculously minimalistic, and I wouldn't really say it gives me a lot to say about it, it is in fact solidly immersive for what it is, certainly lives up to the cold and bleak atmosphere promised by its title and cover, and the tracks are just distinct enough for the experience to not run together, even while I had it on in the background, which is not easy for a project in this genre to pull off, so yeah, promising start. Although this is more or less the same kind of thing, but even better. The tracks feel more like direct continuations of each other, and the continuous mix is a lot more seamless, while the tracks are still just different enough that you can still tell when they begin and end. Also, there's an entire bonus second disc of purely ambient material, which is cool too. Both this and The Coldest Season are the kind of thing I can see growing on me over time. And just for the record, I needed to listen to several of these Deepchord albums twice just in order to form opinions on them. But I do think I was pretty quickly able to wrap my head around where the hype for this one in particular comes from and why it seems to be the one people ask me about the most. I can definitely hang on to it. Next, this is his first solo album under the Deepchord name, and his first to be released on Soma Quality Recordings, which he would more regularly release on. And it's more stuff like the 2 Echo Space albums, but not as investing. It's still enjoyable for what it is. Nice ambience, dub techno grooves are tight, still easily enveloping, and for many fans of the genre, that'll be all you need. But the tracks did actively run together for me a lot more, and the experience was even more likely to fall into the background. Ended up doing more to subtly highlight to me how The Coldest Season and Lumen had something intangible about them, which further allowed them to go the extra mile. The track City Center is sick as hell, though. There was technically one last Deepchord Presents Echo Space album. It's a soundtrack to a film called Silent World. There's nothing absolutely essential here or any new sounds they hadn't done before. Heck, 2 tracks are just alternate versions of tracks from Lumen. But I suppose there is something of a marginally warmer and more summery vibe going through some of this material, seen on tracks like Lisbon, that I thought was pretty cool. Although if we're talking projects with more of a warm and summery vibe, here's one that pulled me in a fair bit more easily. Again, nothing too stylistically far afield of what you'd expect, more really straightforward ambient techno that runs together a bit. minor spoilers, but that's just gonna be the running theme of the rest of these Deepchord projects. But the noticeably warmer and more organic feel to this one definitely stood out to me in comparison to other projects I heard under the name. An intriguing evolution on his usual sound. I fuck with it. More stuff like the last album, but much more focused on the ambient side on average, with a lot of different field recordings from different sources playing into the mix more obviously. They were there on previous albums too, but the use of them stood out to me a bit more here. Also, as per the title, the album is structured very differently, split over 20 tracks, which vary heavily in length from only about 1 minute to up to 10 minutes. Other than that, it's nice vibe as usual, but nothing mind-blowing. And this one, the first project to be released on a smaller time label called Astral Industries, is structured the exact opposite way as the last one, with only 4 tracks, each stretching over about 15 minutes or longer. Once again, it sticks to the same style you'd expect, but I ended up finding this one of his strongest and most investing albums under the name in a while. The way these compositions gradually evolve over time, and especially the Red Lantern side progressing from one of his tightest dub techno grooves into all these colorful melodic ambient washes, was really cool. I think this was probably my favorite of his solo albums under the Deepchord name. But next up, we got a double album, 2.5 straight hours of his usual ambient techno fare. And I'm gonna be honest, this mostly went in one ear and out the other. It's got its moments. I like these tracks. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily like an active chore to get through either, but there's nothing exceptional here or anything that like strikes me as among his best work, and it's all just kind of the same vibe you would already expect. So probably only essential for, like, super fans and completionists. Now for a brief break from the moody dub techno formula that I definitely didn't just shove in after already having written like 90% of the script, here's the one Echo Space album not attached to Deepchord. Modell and Hitchell making a completely ambient album covering and reimagining the work of ambient composer Michael Mantra as a tribute to him in the wake of his passing. We'll get to Michael Mantra's importance to Modell even more later, but in the meantime, this is a warm and meditative monolithic drone of synth pads, sort of split into 3 movements, but really just meant to blend together into one 70-minute experience. Modell does have a lot of other albums under his real name that sound a lot like this, as I will get to, and I wouldn't say it's one of the most exemplary works he's ever contributed to, but, you know, it's about as nice and immersive as you would expect. Now getting back to Deepchord albums, this one just kind of generically sounds like all the other Deepchord albums, but more lifeless and drab. Maybe this could have hit better if I didn't hear it in close proximity to like 6 other albums that did similar ideas better, and I hadn't slightly burned myself out on this brand of vanilla dub techno through this marathon, but yeah, I'm not really hearing anything special here, sorry. Well, this one's a little more on the expansive ambient side and structured into 2 long evolving tracks like an old 70s Berlin School record, so that's neat, but other than that, it's nothing you haven't already heard from him loads of times under this name. And I don't really have anything to say about this one either. I think I liked it more than Aura Tones, but it's basically the exact same album as that. Meh. But okay, that's all the Deepchord stuff, so let's finally start talking about his work under his real name. And thankfully, his body of work under his real name isn't even as close to as samey or formulaic as his work as Deepchord is. To start with, we're going all the way back to 1998 with this one. His first album-length project that I know of was a collaboration with Michael Mantra. See, I told you he'd be important to this story. And it's basically just a 70-minute long spacey drone record with lots of different field recordings. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it achieves the meditative effect it was going for. Picks up more for me in its second half, too. And here's his debut solo album under his real name, also from 1998. Actually not sure whether this or Sonic Continuum came first. I don't know the specific dates. But this is also a pretty straightforward ambient drone record, albeit structured over 7 comparatively shorter tracks, ranging from 5 to 15 minutes, mixed together in a continuous piece and a bit darker in tone. It's also nothing groundbreaking for the genre, but I do think the production is a little stronger, and there's more of like an actual sense of movement, so yeah, this is some good stuff. Here's another album he did with Michael Mantra in 2003 that has more rhythmic elements and like a loose UFO theme. Really just repeating minimal synth riffs over half-hour compositions, but it's still a cool vibe, independent from the usual vibe the Deepchord albums have. And it's worth highlighting for the second side, Gulf Breeze Sonar alone, which got surprisingly really tender and emotional and was legit great. But speaking of minimal synth rhythms, here's the one compilation I decided to include since I've seen it recommended to me a number of times, and even included on a greatest ever electronic projects list or two. It's a collection of early material he did from 1999 to 2004, mostly taking from the previously alluded to early EPs under the Deepchord name. Somehow might be even more stripped back and simplistic than even a lot of the Deepchord material he came out with afterwards, but that simplicity paradoxically allows the compositions to feel more striking and catchy by his standards, without sinking too far into the same old hazy, dreamlike vibe most later Deepchord projects stuck to. It's more easily approachable than you'd expect, so yeah, very nice. Here's a near 80-minute single-track romp through a repeating dub techno synth loop and lots of spooky environmental effects. It's nothing essential, but it's neat. Kinda hits a similar note for me as something like Oudaker's Pearl End Subrange 636, but less minimalistic. This is an album that, as per the title, shows Modell covering and reimagining ideas from the Michael Mantra project AB. I haven't heard Mantra's work to know how Modell's reimagining compares to it, but just taken as a regular album out of context, this is actually one of the most bright and melodic projects I've heard from Modell, and there's a solid amount of pulse to it as well. So yeah, really nice. And this one, by contrast, leans much more into atmospheric techno, both with moments that feel much darker and more experimental, as well as moments that have much more of a present and structured groove that are more easily danceable than the vast majority of the projects I've heard from this guy, while all still adding up to that cinematic city atmosphere you would expect. So yeah, also really nice. Here's another single-track ambient record, technically 2 tracks, but also clearly meant as one piece. But I thought this was way better than his last single-track album. There's a really cool progression from glitchy hissing noises, slowly building into a really warm and melancholic melodic synth chord progression and some light down-tempo percussion, and it's great. Despite mostly being an hour of the same loop of sounds, it's one of his projects that's most effectively wrapped me up in its vibe without me even noticing the length, really. Did not expect to say this, but it's one of my biggest favorites from him yet. This hits on like a little bit of a Manuel Gushing E2, E4 kind of appeal for me. So yeah, I can definitely recommend this. Next up, we got quite possibly his most minimal and quiet and peaceful ambient record yet, which should really be saying something. 10 very delicate interlocking minimal synth and drone pieces meant to hit on the most simple Brian Eno type level, and once again, it's very nice for what it is. And on the complete opposite end, here's probably the single most percussive and hard-hitting project I've ever heard from him, which really isn't saying much, but still. This shows him releasing on Treasure Records of all places, and fittingly going into a much more traditional techno mold in the vein of artists like Surgeon, which is pretty interesting. Cool to see him go a bit more out of his comfort zone and credibly pull it off. Another 74-minute single-track ambient project, this time in collaboration with Merritt Walters. It's just a simple, near-unchanging monolithic drone piece with a lot of gurgling water sound effects. Kinda reminds me of his very first album with Michael Mantra, but with less progression. It's fine, I guess, but not a keeper. Here's an album he did with Taka Noda, 10 disconnected tracks of immersively emotional and nocturnal melodic ambience with a light down-tempo pulse. Noda provides some melodica and harmonica, which adds some particularly interesting flavor to set this apart and help it go the extra mile for me. Though even if you took those elements out, I still think this would be one of the higher tier projects I heard in this marathon. It's really good. This one's kinda like that Cocoon album again, except it's split into 4 sorta distinct movements and the sound is much more expansive and full sounding. It's nice, but not essential. Here's a much quicker 35-minute album he did with Gigi Massin. It's pretty much the exact same vibe as the last album, though there's a little more of a focus on prettier melodies, a few bass arpeggios and parts, and in the second half, synth choirs. So that's neat. And this one, while still very much in the same territory mood-wise as the last two, tries to strip itself down and go a bit more minimalistic. Although, despite the mixes being sparser, I feel like it was able to make up for that in the way it was structured with 4 actually distinct minimal synth ambient pieces that have a clear, gradual sense of evolution over time. That much better pacing did make it a clear step up from the last 2 in my eyes. Theoretically could have gone into more detail in a review in my traditional format like I initially planned, though I still definitely would have been stretching things if I did. Album is very solid for what it is, in any case. And to finish things out, I found out after I'd already scripted the majority of this video that he has already come out with another album in 2025 after Music for Bus Stations. Well, right now you can only stream it on the Silentes label YouTube channel, physical versions and a digital Bandcamp version are coming, but aren't set to go out until, I think, the end of this month. But still, it was all right there, so I heard it. And it looks like this video is turning out to come around full circle. We started with the coldest season, and now we're ending with an album themed around snowstorms. Another one of the darker, more monolithic and stripped back ambient records he's done, split over 8 medium-length tracks. But it is predictably immersive for what it is, perfectly fit for the winter atmosphere, and there's some especially pretty and emotionally resonant melodic moments in there too. I think I like this a little more than music for bus stations, but about on the same level. So there we go. That's all the Rod Modell I've heard. This guy's got a lot of good stuff. I will admit to personally being less impressed by his techno work as Deepchord than I expected, with the obvious exception of those first 2 Echo Space albums that everyone talks about. I definitely understood the hype for those and could easily respect the way they could make this super minimalistic genre still feel easily engaging over their full running times. At least as someone who listens to a lot of this genre. But the Deepchord solo stuff from Hash Bar Loops onwards all kinda ran together for me and just created something of a generic downbeat vibe that didn't pull me in as effectively on average. I thought Lanterns was solid, Summer was pretty good too. I suspect the others aren't gonna be keepers for me personally. Obviously found his catalog under his real name to be much more well-varied and interesting. Even if I'm not sure there's like one specific height that really outdoes all the others or makes for an easy starting point to point to. He just kept delivering hit after hit and made sure nearly every one of them could hit on a slightly different mood. Personal favorites include Radio 4 with Michael Mantra, Incense and Blacklight, Mediterranea, and Glow World with Takanoda. Also Captagon, that was a fun change of pace as he tried to lean into straightforward techno and try something uncharacteristically aggressive. Anyway, if you're a big fan of Rod Modell, make sure to yell at me in the comments about things I may have missed, or albums I have the wrong opinion on or something. And of course, let me know what you think about this new format of just doing an in brief segment without a review of a new album to attach it to. I don't plan to get rid of the usual album review and catalog in brief format that I've stuck to for the past decade. Sometimes I will feel like I need to do both at once. For example, that Zircon video I just uploaded 2 weeks ago, it definitely needed both the in brief segment and the full review in order for me to get all my thoughts out. Go check that video out, it's getting pretty overlooked, I feel like. But yeah, I feel like doing videos like this could maybe theoretically expand their reach or open the door to covering more artists who maybe don't have brand new projects. I also wouldn't be surprised if this video ends up underperforming just because not enough people know who Rod Modell is. But, you know, it was fun to try something new out. We'll just see how things go from there. But, yeah, I will leave it at that. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, or making me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.